Okay, hello everybody. Glad you're here with us today. We have, I think, a really interesting session. We're grateful to our leader, I'll introduce our host, and also our wonderful guest on TV's pioneering women. TV has been important, obviously, and maybe in not such obvious ways for many years, and we're very grateful to have it. And I want to thank all our guests. So let me turn it over to Inara. Thank you very much for being here, Inara.
Well,
And I'm sorry, just one other thing, as usual, also I think you're aware of this, we have group chat, questions, comments, just write to me. Okay, there I go. Now I really mean it, Inara.
okay. Well, I'm very happy to be able to present this incredibly impressive panel of pioneering women at NBC. Let me introduce each of them. First of all, Marilyn Altman, who became the first female technical director at the network back in 1981 and went on to lead the technical teams responsible for bringing important remote news specials like political conventions to millions of viewers. Thank you, Marilyn. Just raise your hand so people can see you. Karen Curry, who was our next panelist, started out as a secretary, similar actually to my career, and ended up as one of the first women to be London Bureau Chief for NBC, not similar to my career. She was also a vice president and bureau chief for CNN in New York. And most recently, she has retired from a teaching position at Drexel University in Pennsylvania. Correct me if I've gotten anything wrong, you guys. Okay. Our third panelist is, where is she? I can't even see it. Helene. Oh, there you go. Helene Darvik, who for some 38 years at NBC and WNBC hoisted and operated tape machines and for a while also cameras at respectively 25 pounds and 40 pounds each. This was no mean feat. There were very few women when she started in the late 70s, if any. You can, clarify that for us. And that remains true even to this day in field crews. Fortunately, the gear has gotten a lot lighter. So welcome, Marilyn, Karen, and Helene to this discussion. Maybe each of you can just tell us a little bit about, how did you get into television? Was it something that you had in mind, forever? And, were working feverishly to achieve, or, was it sort of serendipitous? Maybe we'll start with Marilyn.
Sure. I would say there's an element of serendipity for me. I had been a political science major, theater minor, and upon graduation, I left the country and ended up living in Greece. And someone who I had met in Greece was involved with Armed Forces radio and television, and I got just very interested in it. And when I came back to this country, that is what I pursued. And fell into the technical end. I went back to night school. That's tough. If anyone's ever gone to night school while working, got what they call a first class FCC license. There were no women that it was very tough to get into either film or television as a female then, unless you really had a strong connection, like a parent. Or a godfather or something. But anyway, laws changed in the EEOC laws changed, and a lot of things started to move. And I had the opportunity to interview at WNEW. I had a college degree, which really didn't count for that much. They really liked my first class FCC license, which I had gotten at night. Which was a sort of engineering degree. And so I was hired there, bounced around in a few of the networks because it was all, they hired you for a few months as what they called vacation relief. And then eventually got hired in Washington, D.C. permanently. And then within a year, I transferred back to New York. And in the next few years, after doing a stint with video and sports and things like that, they made me a technical director. And I started on the Today Show, sign in the back. and and then just grew from there. I ended up, I guess, pulling my weight in things, and I started to do major shows like the Today Show, then moving to nightly news. And then on weekends, they still kept me doing sports in the field as a female technical director, which you didn't see anyone of. I mean, it was exciting and it was interesting. And the one thing I will say that I loved about news, because I really I wanted to get into EJ, electronic journalism, as my friend Helene was in, because of my political science background. It was so important to me to be doing something that news shows, for example, or conventions, where I felt that we were helping to disseminate information and keep this population politically educated. And I really felt very proud. Nightly News was really just the greatest show I'd ever worked on, but then ended up doing conventions, town hall meetings, things like prior to conventions, we were in New Hampshire. There were just so many things that I was involved with politically that really just made me feel very good about the work I did. So and there you have it.
So
I just want to make a quick comment. I was also a poli-sci major, got a master's in it too, and I envy you. I think that's just wonderful to actually see the real life things, let's call them, up front, and to know what they were like, rather than just getting it filtered through other people.
And Judy,
Yeah.
I will say that, I think that the importance when you study politics or history, knowing how important having an educated, people, just having that, the country is, somewhat educated, that, they get the facts of news, is just really crucial. And it was, in both cases, I did a lot of sports when I was younger as well, but news was my path. And I have to say, it was a seat to history in both cases. It really was. So it was very satisfying. And then I went into management doing similar things anyway. So,
but tell us about your first interview at NBC.
my first interview, they said that if you're looking to get into TV, you should always start with your local station. Well, I grew up in New York City, so I went to WNBC. I met with a gentleman who looked at my resume and said, nice resume, kid, but no man is going to work with you. I just sat there and I thought, really? Okay. But like I said, openings, you have to just be persistent. And I think the women of my age group, we were very persistent, and all we wanted was a chance to compete. That's all we wanted. I wasn't there, as I told another gentleman who said he didn't know why I wasn't home having babies. I'm here to do exactly what you're doing, and that is help support my family. Just, I'm not here to make a point to you. And, I just said, you don't know anything about me, about my background, but I have fiduciary responsibilities, and I'm here to earn a living. And after that, he became a big fan of mine. Once he knew I wasn't trying to challenge him on anything other than I just wanted the chance to compete.
So I meant to say earlier, for everybody on this Zoom, if you do have questions, remember, to either, forward them to Judy in the chat, or, raise your hand, or, I'd like this to be as much a free-flowing conversation as possible. So Karen, tell us how you ended up at NBC.
I was a philosophy major and graduated in 1971, and didn't have a clue. I was sort of a half-baked hippie, and I knew I had to have a job for the summer. So I went to, I have told myself that the name of the employment agency was the Gertrude Stein. That can't be true. But you had to either type 65 words a minute or have a master's in social work. So I left and I called my sister, happened to be working as as an assistant on the Tonight Show. And I called her and she said, well, listen, I'll call personnel, as it was called in those days. And so I went and they agreed for me to come in there and they gave me a typing test. And I went into a room with a bunch of other people, and it was electric typewriters. Somehow I kicked something and disconnected everybody's typewriter. Then they kind of plugged themselves in again and did it. And then I guess, again, to be nice, they sent me to the unit manager's department for an interview. The guy like really so didn't want to be talking to me. And he said, well, we don't have anything, but if we did, we'd expect a 2-year commitment. And I was thinking, oh, of course, that would be a problem. And I'm thinking, yes, right, I'm going to be here for the summer. And he said, but we don't have anything. Yeah, bye. So I was living in the Bronx at the time. I get home and my phone rings. They had fired a secretary in between the time I left and got home. And I was the last face they saw. So they offered me the job. And I took it honestly thinking I would do it for a few months. But like a lot of things, you get into an environment and it appealed to me. But I wasn't one of these people who practiced with a brush in front of the mirror doing stand-uppers. Like I know people who did that, knew they wanted to get into news the whole time. I didn't even know it was going to be news for me. But I worked with a bunch of people as their secretary. And one of them was a woman named Marilyn David, who was a fantastic person. She was the first female unit manager in the business. And she was in charge of a lot of the logistics for the upcoming 1972 political conventions. So I worked exclusively with her on that. Was in Miami. It was the end of the second convention. The nightly news wrap party is in a hotel by the pool. 2 PAs were there. There were 3 PAs. One was leaving, and over a glass of wine, they said, "Oh yeah, we have an opening. Are you interested?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." I mean, that would never happen again, and shouldn't have happened that way. But those were back in the days when things like that happened. And then one thing led to another. But what I want to say is that Marilyn and Helene are really the pioneers here. I had like the girly approach to the job. I was a secretary, and that's what you could get as a female. They were really pushing the envelope, and I'm in awe of what they were both able to do. But that's how I got in. And then one thing led to another. I went to work for Nightly. I worked on the Today Show. I went to London, and I had a great time. Thank God I went to the pool that night for the party.
So you did tell me one story about when you wanted to, move up from being a secretary to being a PA or a researcher, and the person who interviewed you, how did that go?
I have blanked that person's name. I have no idea who it was, but I went in there and I think it was a researcher job. And he looked at me, he goes, well, it's not going to work for you. He said, but if I get a lightweight job coming over, I'll keep you in mind. But I wasn't tough. I mean, I didn't say, F you. I just was nonplussed and walked away with my tail between my legs. But yeah, that's what they felt could be said at that time. Yeah.
So, yeah, I like how you both, Marilyn and Karen, have diplomatically forgotten the names of these people. So Helene, tell us about your journey.
Well, I grew up watching Robert Trout with the news when it was like 15 minutes long, and we were a Huntley Brinkley family, mostly because my mother loved classical music and Beethoven was the background of Huntley Brinkley. Truly true story. But actually, I was going to be a high school. I know it's funny, don't laugh. A high school speech teacher. I was going to put on the plays. That's what I wanted to do. That's why I love Broadway. And so that was my intention, and I did become a teacher. Not that, but we had a big fiscal layoff somewhere in the early 70s. And so I had to find a new job. I was at a friend's wedding. And I love mixing my own tapes and music, also some hippie, latter day hippie. And he said he just got a third class license, and he was gonna for DJing. And I remember I said third class, and I just looked at him. I said, well, what's a first class? He said, oh, that's very technical. And I said, oh, okay. I was like, I'm not going to be third if I could be first. Literally, that's what I thought. So I went to a school during the day, and I got my first class license in like 8 weeks. One of those Apex school where they also give you a toolkit. I mean, it was insane. It was on 42nd Street. It was just so crazy. There were 2 other women in the class. Everyone else was all men, and I think 4 of us were college educated. I think we were the only one who passed the test. But because of the first class license, like you, Marilyn, it opened up a million doors. And my first job was in Florida working for a big AM radio station. And because I had a first class license, I was allowed to put us on the air and off the air. And I did that on a midnight shift temporarily until they went electronic, and then sent out resumes and was hired by WTCG in Atlanta, which was Ted Turner's first station before it became CNN. And it was in a Victorian house with a huge antenna in the backyard. And it was Channel 17 in Atlanta. And I worked there for about 8 months, got unintentionally fired. I was actually a TD. Now that I look back, I was the person who did the commercials and loaded up a machine in the middle of the night in between ball games, movies, and wrestling. That's what I did. And I guess I had too many mistakes. So they fired me, and I was the highest paid person there at $175 a week.
Wow.
They fired me. And there was my girlfriend's mother said, hey, all these people are coming to Atlanta for news directors. So I stood outside and I handed out my resume to every news director in the country. And
Helene, why were you fired?
oh, because I loaded up the wrong commercial too many times. But I actually think there was a guy there who I was working with someone else, and I think that he sabotaged me, but that's a whole nother story. I think, but who knows? But it worked out for the grace. And this guy named, I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Reed. And he was the Southeast Bureau Chief for CBS News. And he took my resume and he said, I can help you. My friend, Garfield Ricketts, is a TD up in New York. And he didn't tell me what they need people. They actually needed women. And so I was from New York. And so I was excited. So I was going home anyway, because I didn't have a job. And I would have loved to have spent the rest of my life in Atlanta if I could have. And when I interviewed with Garfield Ricketts, he kind of hired me on the spot, although I don't even think I knew it. He just asked me a bunch of questions. And basically, I had worked in television, I worked in radio, I had an FCC license. I think that's all he had to hear. And he just said, okay, and you're in EJ. And I didn't even know what it was. I was really so innocent. And I just showed up. And I remember my brother said to me, how much are you making? I was like, I don't know. What's your vacation? I don't know. What do you I don't know. But I got this great little toolkit with cool tools in it. And I'm like, that's all I cared about. And I came in the next day or the next week, and I was like part of a union. And I was now like this union person in a room full of all men except for one woman. And it was WNBC and NBC. And we had, the phones on the wall. The phone would ring, you'd pick it up, and you'd get your assignment. They would ask for a camera person, and then you'd go with them. And there I was. And I learned on the job learning, really, because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know it was a job. I didn't even know it was a career. It was a mystery.
So what were you doing? Were you doing audio?
Doing audio. Yeah, everyone started in audio. Unless you were a camera person, from their film department or maybe from one of the soap operas, you immediately started in audio. And so that's how it went. So they gave me this huge Beta 100 that took 100 tapes. You know that, Marilyn.
Right.
Weighed a ton.
Yeah.
But I was, and there was a video cable that went to the camera, and the cameraman would say roll, and I would hit the play thing and I would roll, and at the same time would mic people, and I did all the audio. And you just, wherever the cameraman went, it was like being you 10 steps behind. Wherever they went, I would just, yeah, okay. And it was great. It was really fun. It was a world of knowledge to me because, I grew up without a car. So we were doing Westchester County. We were up in Ossining. I didn't even know where these places were. It was all new to me. I knew Brooklyn really well, but that was about it. So it was mostly for WNBC at first, and then eventually the network.
So how was it being one of the few women in the field, Helene?
Well, fortunately for me, I had worked in other jobs where I was like the first woman, and I was pretty familiar being in a man's world. And honestly, I'm like a guy, so I was like just one of the guys. However, I may have thought I was one of the guys, but they did not appreciate more of the fact that some of the other guys had been working summer relief for years trying to get this job. And I just popped in and got it with no experience as far as they were concerned at the network. So they were angry about that. And, and I had no clue. I was not a vacation relief. They asked me about a beach list. I remember I asked them, I go to Jones Beach, I go to Coney Island Beach. I had no clue what they were talking about.
What is a beach list? What's a beach
Marilyn,
list?
you know what a beach list? It was
a list, I think, of backups or in order of who they would call.
Oh,
Wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that. And
it was a beach list of people that maybe had worked there, and they would call you back, and it was still a relief position,
right.
So like Helene, I also bounced around a bit. I had no connections there in any of the networks because I did go from NEW to NBC to ABC to NBC.
Right. And it was a union gig, and they were really angry that I, got in, because basically everyone there had either worked at NBC or their father, their uncle, it was a real nepotism, completely 100%. It was a miracle if you were able to get in previous. And this was like and video was only new, was only 2 or 3 years old at the time. So even more so, we still had film guys who filmed for World War II.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
A lot of them. So there was some pretty talented older people who came into this new department. It was either that or they retired.
You said that they needed a woman. So tell me the background to that. Why was that?
It was some kind of a lawsuit in the 76 or 77 at NBC. It was a class action lawsuit, I believe. I don't know who brought it or what it was about. Marilyn might know more, but apparently they needed
Good
women. They needed to diversify, and they needed women. I'm sure they needed people of color, and it was like right place, right time.
What do you know about it, Rita?
Oh, we had Betty Furnice, and I had a woman in the office who had been a daily news newspaper woman, and she'd been brought up from network to work with us. And she found out that she was making less money than men in the same position, and she brought the lawsuit and won.
Oh, so that was the lawsuit that may have paved the way for Helene, you think?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I did do a little bit of research about this, and I couldn't find that particular lawsuit, but there was an EEOC report from 1971 that was examining the practices of the network O&Os. And by O&O, I mean owned and operated stations. So it was, WNBC, it was KNBC, it was, like 5 or 6 stations throughout the country. What was WRC, like one of them also. So the conclusion of that report, it didn't have any legal force, but I think it probably supported your friend's argument that she was getting paid less, because indeed they found out that, I'm quoting, the radio and television stations here owned and operated by the National Broadcasting Company were found today to have discriminated against women in promotions to managerial jobs, in salaries, and in hiring for non-managerial jobs. So the district office of the EEOC found that there were, of 25 managerial jobs at the stations, just 1 was held by a woman. 5% of the station's female employees were paid more than $15,000 annually. This is in 1971, so not even that much. Whereas 43% of the male employees were paid above $15,000 annually. It also found that there are several job categories, including that of announcer, in which no women had ever been hired, and that job vacancies in some of these categories were not made known to female employees. So, there was a lot of real hard evidence, that the O&Os were not, complying with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so then I guess they got their act somewhat together, and, therefore Helene, managed to slide in, despite having very little experience. I mean, I think she turned out to be an excellent hire, and, nobody ever regretted hiring her, but, it must have been tough to be, and so that also affected your career. Is that right, Marilyn?
Yeah, I mean, I know something about that lawsuit, and actually we have a good friend, Karen and I, Kathy Powers was part of it.
Oh,
You know the name Lucy Jarvis. She
right.
pushed for that, but it was I don't know how many people were involved, Judy Faraday. I mean, there are a lot of people that we know. And you're talking about 50 years ago. I mean, a couple things, the laws had changed, and that for NBC for sure, because I had a real dust up with another man there, another technical director, Inara. I think I told you the story.
Yes. Yeah, it's a little bit R-rated.
Really R-rated. And
I want to hear it. I want to hear it.
We'll hear it.
It's pretty insulting. I don't know how to clean it up. But
maybe it can refer to the words with their initials,
well, the bottom line is I was doing video at the time. This was before I became a technical director, and I was taken off of the show. And oddly enough, I turned to the guy who was behind me, who was a technical director of the show, and asked him, I see that I'm not doing, I was doing a sports show as video operator. And I said, do you know anything about this? And he said to me, yeah, I took you off the show. And I said, why? We were in the hallway, and he said in a rather loud voice, I'm not going to be working with any I'm going to say it. Are we all women? Can I say it?
No, my brother's here.
I think we know what you mean.
Just have 4 letters.
Get it.
I'm not working with any, and I'm certainly not working with any, the N-word cunts.
Wow.
Me in an open hallway in a loud voice, and he was my age, so I'm like 25. I'm from all of our generations, the 60s. No one spoke like that. And I straight away went into my boss. One of the first things he said was, God, what a schmuck. We just finished paying off a big lawsuit here.
Right.
So he said, what a terrible thing to say. And he fixed it. He fixed it for me. I mean, he was very much on my side. And I think it's interesting. I will say, I think that Karen, Helene, and our colleagues, we really had a real golden time at NBC because, you know, TV was still relatively new. News TV for half-hour shows was all relatively new. And some of us had, you know, backgrounds that suited it, others maybe not as much. But quite frankly, the women that came in had interesting backgrounds that I did think made for very good competition with the men, because as Helene said, it was a very nepotistic um, grouping here at, you know, in TV and in film. It's very nepotistic, and so we kind of broke that. Interestingly enough, and it was still also union based, but anyway, it was a really incredible time to get into the business, male or female. It was a great time to get into the business. And so, and it was a good time for us. But we did have, you know, the strength of law on our sides. And whether we knew it or used it, it was there. I was aware of it. I was aware that suddenly my FCC first class license, you know, they had to pay attention to that. That was not a
Exactly.
thing. And that somebody, when I was living in Greece, said, if you're going to go for TV, get that license. No one could shut a door in your face. And that was true. Never mind my political science, you know, never mind any of that. It was because I could run a transmitter. It was because I had an engineering background.
Exactly.
So,
And I would say, you know, the same, I mean, Karen, you know, you come in and at a certain time in the world, it was about connections, but quite frankly, if you didn't pull your weight in those days, they'd find a way to get rid of you.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's always struck me, and it sounds like everybody's had the same thing, there is no real training ground. I lived in England for a long time, and in the UK, the BBC in particular would have this very sophisticated process of bringing people in and actually training them and training them in different skills. Here, you got in, you got thrown. I remember when I was on the Today Show, I was hired as a writer, and then the executive producer called me in and said, the Christmas show last year sucked. I want you to produce the Christmas show. Don't take any assignments from anybody else. I said, well, what do you mean produce? I don't know. Just give me 2 hours. So
wow.
I did. And then the next year he said, okay, I need you to do the Christmas show. I said, I did the Christmas show already. I need you. I said, no, I'm not. He said, I need you to do it. I said, I'll do it if I can do it in Europe. I don't care where you do it. So I went to Europe and I did the Christmas show. But those were, I mean, I just made it up as I went along, and I kind of asked people for help. My mother was a dancer. My father was a cop. And it was like the perfect
Huh.
combination of things in my background that made me function in the Today Show environment, which was kind of serious, newsy, partially, and then kind of showbiz. But you know, it's not like you go to medical school and you get trained for this stuff. You just get in there and you figure it out.
Did you get a pay bump for being a producer
I
versus?
thought, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Not. And that's one of those great things. It was like, in a weird way, a Faustian bargain I made, you know, sort of, okay, I wasn't even thinking like that. I was a woman from that era. Some guy was asking me to take on the assignment of creating an entire 2 hour show. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. It never even occurred to me that I was being probably exploited. But my rationalization is, okay, so now I have this thing on my resume. I can now call myself a producer, a show producer, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that happened to a lot of us, is that you sort of worked above your pay grade for a while and until you got the promotions.
Mm-hmm. I think young people in the business now wouldn't do that. I think people are much more aware of the exploitative nature.
Right.
I don't really feel I was exploited, but maybe I'm being Pollyanna. But I do think that those things are less easy probably to pull off now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, the whole structure is a little different now too, because of not only the weight of it, but the, you know, the complete technology. I mean, I was still, when we first started at WNBC, live shots were like, was a big
Magic.
deal. And it was, you know, we had a truck, and I'll never forget, I was working with the only other woman, Martha Morgan. She did camera, and they teamed us up together on the weekends.
Mhm.
And we had a shoot, and it was very windy day, and we took out the truck, and at the time, you literally climbed up to the roof of the van, put up a tripod, screwed in a microwave dish, and aimed it at Empire State Building from wherever you were. And I remember one time it was so windy. We went up and I took the dish out and it flew out of my hand. And Martha's like, what, what's going on? What's going on? And I'll be right back. And I was like literally chasing like a hubcap down the hill to get it, to bring it back, to put it back. I mean, that's how insane it was. And now they barely even use some of the satellite technology is on its way out because everything is with the portable is done through cell phones. People go one-man band, go live everywhere. It's like no big deal, and everything is wireless and everything. And the mobility of both the reporters. I mean, we're using drones. Those big shots are,
Right.
the camera people are manipulating drones to get a good stand-up, because after all, that's what counts. It's a stand-up. It's all about the bridge and the stand-up as far as the reporter was concerned at that time. Now I think they've got like a minute to do a story, so you're lucky if you even get your face on the air.
Right.
But at that time, most of the news types were at least 3 minutes. Sometimes you get 5 minutes for an actual piece, like a news piece.
Yeah.
What's it down to now? A minute?
Minute 20, maybe, Yeah.
Unwatchable as far as I'm concerned, but what do I know?
Gabe used to fight for 2:20.
The technology has really shifted so much to allow them to put so much in a newscast.
But I think the problem, I think the technology is great, but the problem is that if you focus too much on the technology, like the actual work of the journalism, the reporting, writing, all that kind of stuff, if you can get a picture out there, get it and get on the air without having done the legwork to be able to have something cogent to say. So I think it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Technology.
So I think, these days technology has changed the face of everything. Really of what we do or what we did. I think not that I want to speak for Karen and Helene, but when we were, and you, Inara, as well, because you've been there for all those years with Gabe Chrisman. It was very hardcore news, really looking at a subject. There was a lot of research done. There was a lot of vetting done. Like you couldn't get things on the air without having your script and sources being vetted a couple of times.
Right.
And everyone had to get through Gil Milstein to for their script. I think he would slash adjectives and adverbs and things like that.
Yeah, we'd come back from some stories literally with 50 or 60 tapes that had to be looked at and edited. Literally, if we did a story on the farm crisis in America for the Today Show, and we were gone for almost a week and a half, and we were all over the country, and we came back with so much footage. It was amazing, and they would now. I guarantee you don't even shoot 25 minutes in any given story. I'm sure. At least that's what it looks like from what I see.
And all that tape had to be spliced and put together to put together a short show.
Yeah. Maybe this is a moment to go to some of the photos that you all have offered us. And again, well, why don't we start with Helene, since we can also see her hauling her equipment there. So Helene, tell us a little bit about these photos.
The one on the left was the royal wedding. We were there for the royal wedding, and that was in 2011. It's just so much fun. That was just so much fun. And it was crazy. We did a bunch of stories with different people. We were there with Meredith Vieira, We went to the hat people who made all the little hats, and we just did all these wonderful side stories for the Today Show. And then day of, we were one of the live crews that, that were in the whole mass. So
What were your hours like? I mean, you're 5 hours
they were just-
behind.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were just forever. I mean, you just got up and you never knew when you were going to come home till it ended.
Right.
There was no, it was routinely at minimum 18-hour days.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Helene, what was, maybe it sounds obvious, but what was fun about it? Seeing the rituals or what?
Oh, just getting I was right there when they did the kiss on the balcony. I was like just witnessing everything. Just, I mean, I was it was exciting to see the carriages go by. I mean, I was there. It was
Yeah.
like, it was just great. It was a great experience. It was really tiring and exhausting, but if you push through that, it was, it wasn't a dangerous situation. It was just it was a happy situation. So those are always good.
Wonderful.
Are you in
Yeah.
the White House on the right there?
I am in the White House on the right. I was able to do, I think, 3 or 4 a day in the life with Brokaw. We did Clinton. We spent a day in the life at the White House with Clinton. We did it with Bush. We did it with Obama. That was Obama.
Ah, great.
It's wonderful.
Now, where are you here?
I am in Sri Lanka for the tsunami in 2004.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's kind of where we huddled together. That was my makeshift little station. The satellite dish was to the left, like 20 feet away, and we were with Ann Curry doing, nightly news, the Today Show, anybody who wanted us.
Helene, could you, tell, although maybe you're going to get into this now, I would love to hear what you saw 2 Democratic presidents, 1 Republican, their party affiliation may or may not have meant anything. What were these people like to actually see them up front and personal?
Gracious, very gracious, really warm, very kind. They were really nice people. I mean, I could say that about just about every celebrity that I ever did as well. Very gracious, really nice I mean, we were the ones who were going to make them look and sound good, so they weren't going to not be gracious to us. But they were all very professional, I would say, and they really, it was really, the relationship was more really with Tom and Brokaw doing the interviewing, and so it was very professional on a professional level, and again, very, not their first rodeo with dealing with the press, but at the particular time, there was still some respect for the press. Couldn't say that now, but
Yeah.
I think so. It was wonderful, actually.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other photos, Julia, for Helene? Yeah. Oh, here we are. Yeah, there she is with her audio
was us.
equipment.
That was us having some fun at the convention. The what does it say? Oh yeah, the Iowa caucuses. Yeah, we had a chance. It was an empty stage, so they had the donkeys up there. So we all took turns jumping on the donkey and posing. It was just a fun picture. And then the one on the right was in New Orleans. We were covering some of the hardships they had in New Orleans. This was towards the end. So we also did, what did I say? Beautiful, horrible situations in beautiful places.
Mm.
I had a lot of fun at the job, but we also did some pretty horrific, if there was a disaster, chances are I went to it.
Oh, yeah.
That
Don't
was-
read the sign behind.
Yeah, so I always tell people that I started and ended my career with 2 nuclear disasters. The first was 3 Mile Island, and the second was the campaign of Donald Trump. So, I retired in 2016. That was taken in Wisconsin. I believe we were in Wisconsin for one of his town halls. So it was winter, and that's the other part of the job where I think, we were out there in all kinds, when there was a hurricane and Al was out there, so was I. That's the other part. And I think that's why, the job takes us, doing what I did took a certain amount of being willing to be out there in the elements. 100 degrees out, you still had to do the story. Freezing cold, 60 below in the Antarctica, we did a story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I have some picture somewhere with a thermometer and me pointing to it.
Give us just a couple of highlights, things that, you really remember, that you're proud of, that were unusual, that you couldn't have expected.
I have to say, although everyone always thinks I'm going to say all the fun stuff, I did all the Where in the World is Matt Lauer, which was great. But the things that I enjoyed the most was there was a producer named John Block.
Oh, I know him, yeah.
Yeah, and him and he and Bill Schechner did some of the most poignant pieces that I have ever done in my life. And they were the ones that I remember the most, being in a horrible ghetto in Newark. We did a piece called Four Corners, and each corner was different. And, I remember we climbed up 22 flights of steps and even the police said, don't go there. It's too dangerous. And my partner and I and John climbed up, and we went into this woman's apartment, and she read this beautiful poem that she had written. It was more of those stories that stay with me more than the ones that you would think, climbing up Yosemite Mountain and spending 8 days up there with Bob Dotson, doing a story about a handicapped, a guy with no legs who was carried up the mountain and still climbed it. Things like the fun stuff you would think, but it isn't the thing that resonates with me the deepest. It was really some of the stories that I did early on for Dateline before it turned into the murder mysteries or whatever it is now, when they used to really do some fine journalism.
Well, you had very interesting, you're very fortunate in your career. Julia, if we can go to Karen's pictures, that would be great. Okay, so what are you doing here, Karen?
We're in China on I guess it was a Reagan trip, and this wonderful cameraman, Richard Burr, and we're getting ready to do a live shot with a person who hasn't shown up yet.
Who was it?
You live your life in live television. You know what? I absolutely cannot. I think it might have been a well-known Chinese actor who was a little late for his curtain that night. But yeah, that was a little terrifying because in my ear I'm having people, "Who the fuck is he?" Sorry. But that was about as technical as I ever got because I'm not terribly good with technology and stuff. But
you look about 12 in this picture.
I know. Yeah. God, I wish I was 12 again. And this is talking of royal wedding. I did the Diana Charles, but this was Fergie and Andrew. I know that because Jane Pauley was very, very pregnant, and they almost did not let her on the plane.
Oh, wow.
To do it. So this was the setup with mobile units. We did all the royal weddings. Helene will remember because I'm sure they did the same thing in what's called Green Park, and then you face onto Buckingham Palace, and all the networks would be set up there, and we'd have all these trailers. And this is the thing about when you work on something like the Today Show, you kill yourself doing pre-interviews and like you're doing an hour for something like today, and you write questions and you really hope, and then you hand it off to the anchor. And for the most part, it goes as planned, but there's always that moment before where you're trying to talk to them and get them in the zone for the interviews. But they were pros. And I did the original royal wedding, this one, and who was the Edward one. But the happy one was really Prince William and Kate. That was a whole different, and so far they're still together, which is,
Did you cover that too?
I did not. No, I was long gone.
Right. And here you're, and with Brian Gumbel, you're also prepping him for his interview.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
This was we did a week's worth of shows in Rome, and this was a photograph. We did like a team photo after that week, and that was really, I was raised a Catholic, so we spent time with the Pope. I didn't like that Pope very much at the time, but one of the highlights of this trip was there is the Sistine Chapel, and then down the hall is the Raphael Chapel, and the Pope did a mass for us, about 12 NBC people in the Raphael Chapel.
Wow.
And it was, the chapel itself was incredible, but it was, even for somebody who at that point was not crazy about the politics of this Pope, there was something, you were a bit awestruck, and there were many non-Catholics in the room as well. But that was kind of an interesting thing. One of my favorite stories from Rome, we did, I had dancers from the Rome Ballet come and do Tarantella in the Colosseum. We did the show in the Colosseum, and we made a stage there. And so they were in one of the trailers, and then I had a cardinal who was in another trailer. The kid brings the cardinal to the ballerina's trailer, opens the door, and they're all stark naked. And they close the door and get him to another thing. And the other thing we did, we had Valentino was on the show, and we decided to do a retrospective of his work. And we had mannequins perched throughout the Colosseum with different vintage dresses of his. And all of a sudden, the police, for some reason, I guess they didn't know we were there, they're chasing these guys with the mannequins around the Colosseum to get them out of there. It turned out great. But that was, I love that show. That was fabulous. This was on, I think, the same China trip. And this young man was assigned to us as a fixer. And he was, I don't even remember where that was. But I had a very bad cough. And he said, I said, well, can we stop and I'll get some medication or something? He said, well, we can. He said, or I could perform a little surgery. I said, pardon? No, I can do that. I've done that before, and it will. I said, no, that's fine. I'll get the pills. Thank you very much. But that's the thing. People who are anchors make a load of money. They can get every restaurant reservation they want. But when you're the behind the scenes people, you spend more time in these locations. You get to really meet fascinating people. And you know what? For my money, it's the best job to be behind the scenes.
Well, you're really there, as person to person, it's not this intimidation of, a person you've seen on television.
This was interesting that we were there for ASEAN, the Association of something Asian Nations, and it was in Bali. And when we were there, the king of Bali happened to have died. And the custom in Bali is, and they are set, what's the word, on fire on the top of a pyre.
Right.
Anybody in Bali who's had a relative who's died in between the time of this king's death and the previous king's death can exhume their bodies, bring them to this big open field, and they can all be lit on these pyres at the same time. It was so hot. It was already like 120 degrees.
Oh, wow.
Everything was on fire. So we were huddling to try and get out of the heat there. But that, and again, one of those things, when are you ever going to have an experience like that?
Right. Wow, that's crazy.
It's fun. And this was, I think, possibly after the Achille Lauro hijacking, and we had a couple of days in Cairo, and we went to Giza to see the pyramids, and we took obviously camel rides, and the Egyptian guy who was doing it knew we were in television, and he said, "Oh, Barbara," because they know Barbara Walters. Barbara Walters.
Oh, that's funny.
That's funny.
And this was, I was there the night the Berlin Wall fell down, but this was actually before, it was the 25th anniversary of the wall going up. And, for somebody, again, our age, who grew up throughout all of the Cold War history, that was amazing to mark that milestone. And then X number of years later to be there the night it came down that was probably one of the, in the newsy sense, one of the highlights of work I did, to be there that night.
Did you grab a piece of the wall when you left? I know Bill Wheatley had one on his desk, I think, that broke
Yeah,
off.
I did. It was amazing. It was
Yeah.
really amazing. Yeah. Oh, and this was the credential for the Diana death. Oh my God, it wasn't the wedding. So this, if there are a couple of things. I was the bureau chief in London when Diana died, and then I was the bureau chief for CNN in New York when 9/11 happened. And they were two different, but in some ways similar experiences, given the overwhelming nature of both of those events. And there are two, and then I'll shut up. There are one image from Diana. Everybody in the bureau in London, and there were probably 200 people because everybody came from New York. Everybody had the moment when they broke down. You know, it just was all too much. You're so busy you can't even think. My moment was being in the control room, and Charles brought the boys back to London, and they went to Kensington Palace, and they saw all the flowers that everybody had brought for their mother. And in they come, and I am sobbing in the control room and trying to be on the air at the same time. So, yeah, that was amazing.
It's funny
then-
because I was in front of Buckingham Palace shooting flowers.
You were.
That's where we were. Yes.
Oh, it was Buckingham Palace, right? There was Buckingham Palace, right?
yeah.
Oh, didn't that take your breath away? These two little boys. Ugh.
It's so funny. Yeah.
I still can't listen to Candle in the Wind without Luke.
No.
And I was there as well. I was in the control room for that. It was amazing. But to see the flowers, I mean, when
Amazing. To smell the flowers was insane.
unreal. And how people then, I went to the church the next day, and there were people still bringing flowers with their kids, and you know, after the burial and after our coverage. But my gosh, it was.
Helene, you probably noticed what I was, because I had been living in London for a while then. There were people online going in to sign the book for Diana, and you would have some posh person from Mayfair with somebody from the East End of London, people who would never exchange words probably in their lives. But this event was so universal and so overwhelming. And even if you were not a monarchist or even an anti-royalist, it got you. And it was an extraordinary moment. I mean, they don't last, those moments, but it was amazing to be there at the time.
Is there
Did
anything
you
else of
see
Karen's?
Queen Elizabeth when she came? She was certainly not a fan of Diana's, but she did finally come, I believe.
Oh, when come and speak after the death? Yeah. You know what I'm fascinated by? At that moment, I thought the Queen was on the precipice of really losing popularity, which was unthinkable. She didn't, and of course she went on, and when she left everybody, but that was a really critical moment, I think, in the future of the royal family. They weathered it, and even Charles weathered it, but there was such hostility because so many people really did love her, and they felt that she was not protected.
Are there any other Karen photos? Okay, here we go. We're off to Marilyn. Okay, so Marilyn, you have to explain how you ended up in Vogue magazine.
Lucky. I don't know. I mean, they called me, and they did a whole series of first women doing, you know, either on camera, producer. They did a whole slew of a few of us, several of us, and I don't know how they necessarily got my name. I guess they called NBC, and so that was how it happened, I suppose. I was very stunned by it. But, you know, just to back up some things of what Karen and Helene said, I mean, we really had such seats to history. It was amazing and really profound, you know, really profound. But anyway, that is the old Today Show control room that I first started in as a technical director. And just listening to my two other colleagues speak, we all covered the similar events from maybe different places and different perspectives. And so very interesting. Anyway, so, but that is how I think I ended up there. They contacted me. And so
That's cool. Yeah.
yeah, no, it was, you have to see how old this magazine looks. I've had it all these years.
So you really could go back to your first love, modeling, then.
Yeah, well, anyway, it was very proud.
Yeah, there she is. Yeah, looking pretty glam.
That's
Where's
very
this?
Vogue looking.
I was doing video. I was not a TD yet, but I was doing video, and they sent me to Toronto for a baseball game. And I think it got rained out one day, or whatever. I was walking around Toronto with a couple of my colleagues, and so that was snapping a shot there. And it
Love it.
was, you know, sports was terrific. I am a baseball fan and a football fan. I know a lot of people don't like that, but it was another seat to history in a very different way. And I did love it. I mean, the first time as a TD, when I walked onto Yankee Stadium's grounds, and you know, everywhere I went, it's, you know, stadiums that I had seen on television, and suddenly I was there. And you, every time I watch a baseball movie or a football movie, the smell of the grounds is so wonderful. And it's always true on a day of, you know, of the game. Everything explodes that morning. You know, they're putting lines down and bases go down, and it's the smell and the activity of sports. It's very fun, very, very fun. So that was that. And that was me, I think, doing nightly news in the old Studio 3K, I imagine. And you know, it always cracks me up. Look how I dressed. People, I never wore jeans. I never, you know, it's like I remember probably learning as a young woman that if you want to be taken seriously, you should, you know, dress like, you know, like something. So I remember when they made me a technical director, I went out and bought a new wardrobe. Yeah, well, I didn't want to look like, you know, a schlump.
Well, maybe this is an opportunity to explain a little further what a technical director does, actually. I think that, you know, it's something, it's one of those behind the scenes job that we don't really, you know all the details about.
Well, it's you know, the job has actually grown in many ways, but the bottom line is that you were head of the crew. You were head of all the camera, lighting, audio. You were the leader of that crew. Tape as well was assigned to you. The director sat to my left, and to their left sat an AD, and in the back deck was the producer, senior producer, unit manager. But anyway, the TD was, besides leading that crew as to what had to be done, I was the one that switched up everything that the directors said. In other words, you did, you know, everything that you visually saw on your TV is switched by a technical director, including special effects, video effects. And you would also be, for certain shows, one of their lead people that they would confer with about how visually they wanted to either lay out a show. When we traveled, I was always discussing with my director and producer as to what the show was going to be about, so that how I laid out that switcher would really react well to what they wanted to see visually. And that had a lot to do with special effects. But you were always in touch with the cameras. You were always in touch with EJ, tape, playback. You were always in touch with audio. And you were part of the front deck. So it was a very involved job, which I did love. I did love it. And, you know, you always heard everything about what the producers were talking about. So you could have a sense of looking ahead for how the show was going to go, if they changed something, if some other live shot was going to come up. And when I say that this grew, when you started to do things like conventions and town halls, or when I did playoffs in sports, and you had 25 cameras and 15 tape machines and people talking to you now from like 10 different live shots. You were the person that was on with all of that and coordinating things, including with transmission people. So when you went on the road, it was far more involving and intricate. And Karen and Helene just reminded me of all the other things that I had done being, like Where in the World is Matt Lauer? I did that as a tech manager, setting up everything because that was always out of the country or usually. And so anyway, any questions?
Marilyn, it's me. What would you say why were you able to be so good at that? I mean, it seems to me my head would explode if I had to like that. And what are the qualities that you think a person who does that well has?
That's a good question. It's not like you trained for that, but you grew, I think as we all did, we grew up into the world that we were operating in. You just grew with it. When I first started in TV as a video operator, you were assigned to a crew, to a technical director. You saw what the control room looked like. I remember the first time I was in a control room with all those monitors, and I thought, who the heck? And I remember on the flip side, then being at one of the conventions, I must have had, I don't know, 70 monitors in front of me. And I remember people coming into the truck, which was dazzling. If you've ever been into a mobile unit, it's dazzling. And I remember thinking as I was explaining the control room, I know what every monitor was showing me. I had set up that monitor wall, along with the director and the producer, also helping to set up their communications, just taking notes on everything that they required, and then sitting with, my crew, making sure everything, went correctly. But it's pretty dazzling. And I don't know, what does it take? I think it takes concentration. I think I think like all of us, I guess it just takes a lot of concentration and a good headset so that you hear everybody.
Thousands and thousands of cables.
Yes, right.
Thousands of cables that had to be carried, schlepped, and brought from wherever you were into that truck.
Yeah, and it's also, my job was not just in the truck, especially when I think of the larger events, like doing a convention. I walked out to where, the set was to make sure everything looked right, was neatly done, that everyone had, every person had what they need on my crew, but also, talent producers. I just wanted to make sure that they had everything that they required, monitoring wise, both visual and in their ear. And that was all, you disseminated that, like Helene knows this. That was all disseminated to audio people, and your audio, video, camera people. You had constant meetings with them to make sure, I didn't do all this. But I did plot. You had to plot things out, and you were the head of taking in that information and also giving out that information. And when you were on the air, you were one of the apexes, along with the director. Director and myself were kind of glued at the hip, because that we were the ones that everything kind of passed through, that visually and audio wise would be happening on the air. And I took my direction from the director in terms of what I punched up, but we knew where we were going. I listened incredibly well to whoever directed, AD, listened to that, and I had an ear for the back deck as to where I thought we were going. So that was that. But thank you for that, Karen. It was a very very taxing job. I was always glad when we got off the air cleanly, hopefully. And but it was a very gratifying job, really gratifying.
So we usually try and leave a few minutes at the end for any questions that people might have from the students, from the participants?
Yeah, questions or comments? It's really, really impressive and took a lot of guts, I think, on all your parts to come in and deal with this stuff.
I think this business of being hired because you were a woman wasn't taking place just across television, but maybe because through all of media. Because I was hired in 1972 at a toy trade magazine because they had to hire a woman editor. They hadn't. There were 3 major toy trade magazines, and they had to have a woman. They didn't have any women in the art department or in editorial. And I was the first, and then the other 2 magazines followed suit, not only among the editors, but of course the media salespeople also. So it all changed in 2 or 3 years.
I worked at NBC in the research department in the late 60s. And the head of the department's last name was Coffin, which seemed to be Coffin, not seemed very and they did a study. He wanted to report to the higher ups. So I was invited to come to the presentation, but I had to sit behind the easel so nobody could really see me. Really inspiring. And we were doing a study on the effects of TV violence on children, why anybody would believe us when we obviously had a vested interest, I don't know. But they came right out and said, we want a man and we want a PhD so they can testify in Congress. So, you know, I wonder sometimes, obviously the world has changed a lot. Thank you, thank you. But it was fine in those old days to be very explicit about the sexism. And now I think they have to fly under the radar more. I don't know if any of you would like to comment on that, but to me, that was a very big change. Yeah. Karen, I see you nodding on that. Anything you wanted to say?
No, I mean, I just think you're absolutely right. Then you could be as boldly misogynistic and sexist as you wanted to in those days. And I do think we have not solved every problem, and it's there. It's I suppose it's more subtle now, although the Me Too movement proved that it's not terribly subtle anymore. But yeah, I don't know. It's not solved yet, 100% is what I would say.
You, Rita, you wanted to comment? Or
Yeah,
is Rita-
I found you fascinating. And I remember so well the memories you brought back of the misogynism of the men. I used to have to go down once a week to the Today Show to present what Betty Furness and I wanted to put on the Today Show that week. And as I came in, Brian Gumbel and Steve, what was the producer's name?
Friedman.
Would be throwing a ball back and forth, and they would throw it back and forth over my head. So I had to keep ducking as I was giving my presentation.
That's awful. That's so disrespectful. Yeah.
Never was able to find out, did you know, Inara, how much money other people made? I found out years later that we were making much less than the men.
I have my own Steve Friedman anecdote. I was in an interview for one of the magazine shows, and he had a bat this time.
I'm sorry, he had what?
He had a bat. And they were, and the executive producer, I think it was Paul Greenberg, was, and they were sort of joking about these, the bat, while I was trying to present myself as a producer. And it's just very, I don't know, really unfortunate.
Well, I guess we should be grateful for whatever progress we've had, and I hope certainly we continue and there's more. I want to thank all of you for telling us your stories and for having the guts to do as much as you did in a very difficult time and a particularly difficult area. You're very impressive, and we want to thank you so much for being with us today. Can we all thank everybody?
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks so much. It was really
Yeah.
fascinating.
I'm
Yeah.
very impressed. I
And as I
really
said in the 60s, keep on trucking, kids.
Right.